Hello there, my social studies heroes. Welcome back to Mr. Herring's fifth grade social studies class. Today we are beginning Unit 2 with our first lesson, the European explorers, our early European explorers, which started out being our Spanish explorers. And when we'll talk about Christopher Columbus a little bit. So today's lesson, we're going to be discussing early Spanish explorers, including Christopher Columbus. Today, my Learn It, I can explain when, where, and why groups of people explored, colonized, and settled in the United States, including the search for religious freedom and economic gain. The essential question, or understanding or unanswered questions, is what motivated Europeans to explore or move to the New World? And before we start, you really have to understand this adventure that these explorers set out on was extremely dangerous. They were going to cross an incredible ocean that had never been crossed before with tremendous amounts of unknown dangers and hazards, and the likelihood of survival was minimal. There wasn't a great chance of survival. So there had to be a lot of motivation to drive these explorers to taking on this extreme challenge. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So as you learned in fourth grade, there were many, many explorers. Here are just a few. We had Juan Ponce de Leon, of course, Hernando de Soto, Cabeza de Vaca, Hernan Cortez, Marco Polo, Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, and then, of course, probably the most famous one was Christopher Columbus, who actually were all sailing for the Spanish monarchy, the Spanish king and queen. Again, this is all a review you learned in fourth grade. Now, what drove these tremendous men to do this dangerous task? There had to be something that really drove them, and there was. There was three very specific reasons that these early Spanish explorers took on this challenge, and they were God, gold, and glory. This was their motivation for exploration. Here are the details, the reasons explorers traveled. God. First and foremost, European nations wanted to spread Christianity throughout the world, and the Spanish were very, very set on this. They were searching for gold. European nations wanted to obtain gold and other new riches to make them the richest nation. They had believed that there was, gold uh, out in this new land that had been rumored of being, and there was none to be found where they were, so they just assumed there must be gold elsewhere, and so that was a big driving factor. And finally, like in all adventures, there is a sense of pride and a sense of wanting to be the best. And European nations wanted to have the biggest empires with the most land and to spread their culture to other areas of the world because they believed their cultures were superior, the best. We would call glory being famous or rich and or powerful. And if you were a famous explorer or one of those explorers from the previous slide and you went out and you found something new, you would be remembered forever, which is the likelihood of all those Spanish explorers. Okay? Great details there. Now, in their quest or their adventure, there were obstacles. And we're going to see some patterns here that all of these explorers would suffer. The challenges that these explorers faced, these great obstacles, there weren't very good maps and there weren't very good navigation tools back then. There was no Google Maps. Most of the land and the oceans that they were exploring had never been explored before. So these men were making their own maps as they went. And these journeys would last for months at a time, and most often they didn't take enough supplies. So a lot of the sailors on the boats would, of course, starve. And on top of that, if they did happen to get sick or in the air of the new territories that they were exploring, their bodies weren't immune to some of the bacteria and things in the air, and so they would get disease. And so a lot of the sailors would die. And there was a great fear of the unknown. In these days, there were huge legends and myths about great, gigantic sea creatures that were seen in the ocean. And this could have been anything that we have today, such as great blue whales or orca whales or any sea animal that the Spanish were never used to seeing. And finally, this is a big one, lack of adequate supplies. Uh, Good, adequate means good. And you're going to see this trend for all of these explorers. They just didn't have adequate supplies to face what they were going to encounter, like the weather or the climates. They didn't have, these fancy rain and snow and cold weather jackets and things like that, on top of adequate food and drink. We laugh about it, but water wasn't a very popular item on these boats. Water was extremely difficult to purate or um, distill or make pure or make available to drink because of the diseases and the bacteria in water. If you know anything about water, in order for it to be good, you have to boil it. Well, that's a very long process. And so most of these explorers had things like wine and alcohol on the boats because it were easier to make than to get barrels of water. However, in addition to the obstacles or the challenges, there were quite a few accomplishments of the exploration. There were some successes of exploring. Um, First and foremost, they exchanged goods and ideas with the new people that they encountered. They improved the navigational tools and their ships. As they learned what they needed, their ships got better. And then, of course, the big one here, they would claim territories for their country. And this was really big. And this was a pattern across all the explorers. And you'll see this trend growing across the different European countries as different European countries begin to explore and follow in the Spanish footsteps. Really, really important. Now, there's a really cool song, and it's loaded in my Schoology page called The Three G's. It talks just about those three G's, the God, Gold, and Glory. And I highly encourage you to go to the Monday folder and watch that quick 4-minute video. It's a catchy tune. Some middle school kids actually produced the little video. It's repetitive, and it talks about the importance of God, Gold, and Glory. Now, one of the most famous of all Spanish explorers, and we give him much credit today to the man for being the man who discovered America or is given credit for discovering America, even though he really never landed foot on North America. He is given credit for being the founder of America, and that man is Christopher Columbus. Now, Christopher Columbus is the explorer who got credit for discovering America in 1492, and that is why we call it Columbus Day. Um, he was sailing for the Spanish, of course. If you know enough about history, these details here, Christopher Columbus never set foot on the North American continent that we know today. But he did land in some islands and made a second trip back and discovered the Virgin Islands. But he did, in fact, never did land on North America. But we do give him credit, and we celebrate the fact that he was one of the bravest men that crossed that ocean with his sailors and his three boats to find what was out here. Now, on the lines of Columbus, we do celebrate Columbus Day. Why do we celebrate Columbus Day? Columbus Day is celebrated in the United States to honor Christopher Columbus, his first voyage to America in 1492. I'm sure you've all heard the short adage, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Columbus actually discovered America on October 12th, 1492, but Columbus Day is always celebrated on the second Monday of the month. We don't celebrate it on the 12th because the 12th is not always a Monday, and so they wanted to make it a pattern and the same, so we celebrate it on the second Monday of every month. Now, on Columbus Day, it has traditionally been celebrated on October 12th throughout most of the United States, parts of Canada, and even in several of the Latin American republics. But in the United States, since the observation in 1971 of the Uniform Holiday Act, we celebrate it on the Monday closest to the 12th, which is usually the second Monday of the month. All right. And then I like this pattern. This is a really interesting pattern. It shows Columbus's trip to and from. Now you'll notice that he landed down here in Hispaniola. Hispaniola was an island south of the North American continent, and then later would travel to Cuba, and then through, in the Bahamas here, some more islands, and then traveled back through Azores up here back to Palos. Portugal, where he left. Spain a little bit. Spain is up here, and then this little piece is Portugal. He would leave, and then the Canary Islands, which is really popular. He would load up for supplies and even find more men to travel with him and travel across that great Atlantic Ocean to the Cuban Bahamas and then to Hispaniola and back home. Now, because of Columbus, we get something very, very important. We get something called the Columbian Exchange. Now, as Christopher Columbus is crossing the ocean and many, many explorers follow him, he gives goods to the peoples that he meets in Hispaniola and in the Bahamas, and he takes goods from them to bring back. Now, today, it's not really a safe practice because, not everybody is acclimated to those things that they get. But back then, we didn't know about viruses and bacteria and diseases and things like that, so they didn't really pay it much attention. But because of the Columbian Exchange, the world market that we have today exist. Um, from Europe, many things were taken to the New World, and from the New World, many things were taken back. So this arrow are the things that are taken to the New World, and then this arrow on top are the things that we bring back. Europe would give the New World coffee and sugarcane and bananas and pears and peaches, citrus fruits, grains, wheat, rice, barley, oats, livestock like cattle, sheep, pig, and horse. None of that existed on the North American continent. And the big one that everybody always overlooks, which was the most negative item delivered to the New World, was diseases. In return, on the way home, they brought back the most important cash crop of the time of the early days was tobacco. Tobacco made lots of men, lots of countries very wealthy. They brought back pumpkins and turkeys, potatoes, peanuts, cassava, which is a fruit, avocados, corn, lots of corn, tomatoes, pineapples, and beans. And this Columbian exchange would grow over the decades and centuries into the open free world market that we have today, and the reason why we exchange goods with each other over continents. All right? Christopher Columbus had three ships. I'm sure you've heard of them: the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. The Santa Maria was the largest ship. It could carry about 40 people and got 20 tons of cargo. The Nina and Pinta carried about 24 people and only 60 tons of cargo each. The living conditions on the boats were extremely difficult. This is not just the Columbus boats, but all Spanish explorers. You would work in 4-hour shifts doing things like cleaning the deck, working the sails, checking the ropes and cargo. When you weren't working, you would sleep anywhere you found space. You would found a spot to sleep in a corner on the top deck if you could, and it was not very comfortable. It was very miserable. The water would spray over the boat side, but you slept whenever you could. You would receive only one hot meal a day, and your diet would be biscuits, pickled or salted meat, dry peas, cheese. Of course, here's the wine. You didn't get water. They didn't have a lot of water. There was no fresh water on the boat. And fresh caught fish. Every day, someone would be responsible for catching fish. They were great fishermen, and that would produce or provide lots of meals for the people on the boat. On the boats, there were some very specific navigational tools. Of course, we learned about the astrolabe, which helped an explorer know where they were, their location, given any time of the day or night. The hourglass passed the time, is how they knew when their 4-hour shift was up. And of course, a quadrant would help them with their astrolabe to find out where they were located and how they had traveled, and they would make their maps. All right? And then finally, the Columbian Exchange here again. This is that pattern that continues today. We are continuously bringing things from Europe, Africa, Eurasia, India, into North America, and from North America taking things back to the European side. In my Schoology page on Monday, there's also a short video about the Columbian Exchange. I strongly suggest you watch it. It's a great video. All right, and that wraps up the early European or Spanish explorers and the great Christopher Columbus. If you have any questions, please reach out and come find me in class. Feel free to watch it again. There is a activity for you to do in the Schoology page to answer questions on this presentation. Have a wonderful evening. I will catch you on the flip side. Goodbye.